Okay, we've talked about the benefits of IPD so far this evening, and including the strong link between IPD and sustainable buildings. Annette covered that. And public agencies really have a strong interest in sustainability as well, as does the private sector, both in the sense of having a financial interest in sustainability as well as a policy interest. And really, in some ways, you can make the argument that public agencies should be a leader in attempting to take on more sustainable contracting approaches. So the question is, can IPD be brought into the public sector? And the answer is yes, it can, although it is more difficult, but it's not impossible. And so the first step in implementing IPD on a public sector, public works construction project is to take a close look at the applicable statutory authority for a contract award for your particular public agency. As you may know, public agencies are subject to competitive bidding restrictions, and there's also a patchwork of particular statutory authority for alternative project delivery methods, but it varies very much from type of public agency to type of public agency, what their statutory rights are with regard to awarding construction contracts. So that's really where you have to start. Once you've identified the applicable statutory authority, it's still going to require some creativity and flexibility to get IPD principles into your public sector project, because the way the public sector statutory law is written, statutory law in many cases is very old, it did not contemplate some of the collaborative principles behind IPD. And finally, it's also necessary, if you're going to attempt to bring IPD to the public sector, to bridge the gap in the public agency knowledge of IPD principles as well as their comfort level with IPD. And while most of you have probably heard of IPD and possibly even worked on integrated project delivery construction projects, the public sector lags behind in these sort of cutting-edge contracting principles, and most in the public sector will be new to it, and so there's sort of an education process that has to happen before a public agency is going to be willing to take this on. So as I mentioned before, most public agencies are subject to competitive bidding requirements. Another way of stating that is contracts have to be awarded, construction contracts have to be awarded on a design, bid, build basis. What that means is that the design has to be completed first to 100% completion, and then the contract documents are assembled and put out to bid, and then bidders, various contractors will submit bids, and the contract will be awarded to the lowest bidder. There's a small concession given. This is primarily a cost award. The determination of the successful bidder is really just on the lowest cost, with a small concession given to whether that particular contractor is a responsible contractor. So by comparison, public agencies have to award their professional service agreements on the basis of qualitative characteristics. And by professional service agreements, I mean architectural agreements, engineering agreements, surveying agreements, construction management agreements. So you have two competing bases of award, one for construction projects based on cost, and a qualitative basis of award for professional services agreements. And as a result, you can't award, a public agency can't award a single contract for both design and construction without having specific statutory authority to do so. And that requires basically statutory authority to do an alternative project delivery method. As I mentioned, there is a patchwork of alternative project delivery statutes available to certain types of public agencies, which we'll get into in a little more detail as we go on here. And just to touch on the most prevalent of these alternative project delivery methods is design-build. And most of you are probably familiar. Design-build is everywhere in the private sector, has been probably for well over a decade. It's still relatively new in the public sector. There are many public agencies that have this authority, including cities, transit operators, counties, a variety of school districts. And every year the legislature seems to be more and more comfortable with design-build authority and is adopting statutes that expand this authority to more agencies. So as you probably surmised by now, design, bid, build, or awarding to the lowest responsible bidder is not IPD friendly. And let me just go over why that is. So first off, design, bid, build requires award of a contract to the lowest bidder, and that really precludes evaluating team members on the basis of their compatibility with each other, and also precludes you from evaluating their familiarity with IPD. As I mentioned before, design, bid, build is strictly awarded to the lowest cost contractor, and therefore you can't really get into these other considerations of what makes up a successful IPD contractor. In addition, because you can't negotiate with the contractor in a design, bid, build approach, you're usually restricted, your compensation terms are usually restricted to lump sum, which precludes some of the incentives and some of the project-based compensation that we've been talking about earlier tonight. And finally, in design, bid, build, you have to have contract documents that are 100% complete before you go out to bid, and that really precludes early involvement of key subcontractors in the design process, which is one of the main advantages of the IPD approach, where you get consistent feedback from the trade contractors in the design process and all the efficiencies that come out of that. So here's 5 different alternative project delivery methods that really, in our view, are able to incorporate some of the IPD principles. And so the first one is not really an alternative project delivery method, but some agencies are not subject to design, bid, build restrictions. And this is really a loophole in the statutory law, more so than by design, but county water districts and charter cities are not necessarily subject to lowest bidder requirements, as well as our local water emergency transportation authority here in the Bay Area. Design build is another alternative project delivery method that allows for incorporation of IPD principles. The Infrastructure Financing Act is another one. Leaseback authority. And then finally, energy service contracts. And by the way, we'll get into these in more detail, but I would say that a realistic goal for a public works project that wants to incorporate IPD is really to incorporate as many of the principles as you can, but it's probably not going to be possible to incorporate 100% of the IPD principles that we've talked about tonight in the public sector, at least not yet. And so just, going into it, know that you have to limit your expectations to some degree. So let's talk about design-build contracts. Design-build, basically, as we talked about tonight, is an award of a single contract to a contractor that's both going to design the project and construct it, as opposed to 2 separate contracts, one for the design and then one that comes after for construction. And the 3 main IPD principles, at least in my view, can be incorporated through design-build contracting. The first one is early involvement of trade contractors in the design phase. Since you're awarding a single contract for both the design and the construction, that design-build contractor can bring in their subs as early as they choose to participate in the design, and all kinds of efficiencies result from that. The compensation can include significant incentives and compensation based on successful project outcome. And building information modeling is also possible with design-build contracting. The Infrastructure Financing Act, this is a statute that's been on the books for about 15 years. It's little used. It really is quite broad authority. The only real limitation is that it applies only to fee-producing infrastructure facilities. By the way, this appears in Government Code Section 5956 at SEC. And it's really a broader form of design-build authority in a sense, because it allows an agency to award a contract for any combination of study, plan, design, construct, develop, finance, maintain, rebuild, improve, repair, or operate. The award is based on competitive negotiation, and the primary selection criteria is demonstrated competence and qualifications.